It's good to see you, Isaac. Thanks for coming over and joining me now here in Brazil. It's been a while since we've seen each other.
Yes.
And now here at the forum as well. So we've had 3 full days of action-packed meetings and networks. So tell me a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing the last, 2 years?
Yes, 3. Well, I mean, first of all, I want to give you credit. You got me out of my hoodie and T-shirt for the first time in 3 years. So, was used to this consulting attire, you in your beautiful vest. I was doing this startup thing for the last few years, and you got me to dress up to come have this conversation. So congratulations. Oh. It feels a little strange to put it back on.
To put it back on?
But for the podcast, the video cast, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to use it. I'm trying to stay away from the VC vest per se, but
yeah. Well, the nice thing about the suit vest is you don't have to iron your shirt, right? That's the real advantage. I think that's what you taught me. Yeah. But no, really great to chat and catch up, and thanks for having me at the forum. So, I was a partner with you for 6 years at KoreFusion, obviously, based in New York, but leading projects globally.
Yeah.
And 3 years ago, moved into this advisor role that I'm in currently, with the idea of starting a startup here in Brazil. And so what we do at Teddy is we do benefits and insurance for independent workers.
Okay.
Something that came out of a lot of the work that we did at KoreFusion, I think, was seeing the growth of the solopreneur, of SMEs, and the lack of really tailored solutions for them and solutions that they need. And I think one of the jokes that we used to have at KoreFusion when we would talk to our banking clients and other clients was, the SME was just a kind of Frankenstein of the consumer platform with a couple of other solutions from the enterprise thrown on top, and none of it quite worked well because it's one of those situations where you have enterprise level service requirements and expectations and consumer level margins. And so how do you do that? But I think that what we were seeing also was the need for customized solutions. And so at Teddy, the idea was benefits and insurance for independent workers. And so we did a bunch of projects globally looking at the gig economy and beyond that, and thinking through that not just from a payments perspective, but even kind of a first principles perspective of, if you're an independent worker, you make money when you work. And so our big question when I joined my co-founders, Daniel and Adu, was what happens when these folks can't work?
Yeah. So you've been on both sides of the coin now. You've been looking at it as SMEs as an industry, what they need in terms of payments, funding, and obviously you're going then instead down the route of offering insurance. But that puts you on the side of now understanding how to pitch to them, what their limitations are. And I think within the context of what we saw at the forum, you're bringing even another layer to what was being discussed, because what was being discussed was many ways geared to either the very large SME producer and exporter or to the mom and pop shop, which I imagine Teddy has been covering, but there's almost even another layer here that you're talking about, the independent professional, the gig worker, and that was hardly ever touched in the conference.
Yeah. So
you're almost adding another layer to the definition of SME, and you want to talk about that a little bit of how we should be looking at this with broader context and eyes.
So you said I'm on the other side of the table, and in 2 ways, right? So not just as somebody now trying to sell a product to SMEs, but also an SME myself.
Yeah.
And so, the first thing is obviously it's different being a consultant and telling somebody what to do than actually trying to implement that. And so when I think about some of the things that even that we've talked about over the last few days as you've been in town and kind of in this advisory role is how to take things and make them more practical for KoreFusion's clients as well, right? But to your point about kind of SMEs, I think that there's, and even in the conversations we were having over the last few days, we see that with a number of the folks that we talk to is there's different types of SMEs. So there's kind of middle market companies, that the M in the SME were mid-sized companies, hundreds of employees, tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue every year, profitable, sustainable, sometimes global businesses. that need a very different thing than does the small business, where it's, a small advertising company, a small construction company, whatever it might be, versus, sometimes you see the little M before the SME for micro, the micro entrepreneur, the solopreneur. And so the way that we've thought about it in Brazil is half the workforce in Brazil are independent or informal. And so those are micro enterprises registered as, you might be an MEI, you might be an ME. So microempreendedor individual, microempreendedor. There's a lot of complexity to the Brazilian tax and company formation space that we don't have to get into. You might be just a limitada in your own way. And so there's different ways that these people are set up, and they have different requirements depending on the size of the business, the type of business, who they are. And I think there's a lot of quick references in our heads that we make, the associations that we make in terms of, well, that's a small business. And there's lots of different types of small businesses. So, or that's, an independent worker is a gig worker. That's something that we see a lot at Teddy is, we often get called, okay, you guys are working with gig workers. We actually have 0 gig workers on our platform right now. At least in the sense of a gig worker where you're talking about a driver, rideshare driver, or a delivery driver. What we do have are nurses, people that are cleaning, in the cleaning industry, franchises, small store owners, things like that, which are also independent workers. And then you go upstream and you see folks like doctors and lawyers that are independent workers here as well as in the US and in other markets where, a lot of people, especially in kind of this medical industry, professional services industry, may make really good incomes and you wouldn't call them a gig worker. But they're independent workers and they're being tasked to make a business, and they've never gone to business school. They've never done any business classes. And, a doctor knows how to be a doctor, right? You want them to focus on your cholesterol. You don't want them to necessarily focus on running a business and paying their taxes, but they need to because somebody needs to take care of that. And so how you approach these businesses and these business owners with these types of solutions is really important. You have to understand the context that they're coming from. And I think that's probably the question you're getting at is, how do you sell into these companies? Because we would do projects when I was at KoreFusion, on better payment solutions or integrated, embedded finance or whatever it might be. And it sounds great on paper and it makes sense for the company logically, but that person isn't necessarily thinking logically the way a consultant is when they're preparing their PowerPoint. They're thinking logically from the perspective of, if it's a doctor, how do I see more clients? How do I run this company? How do I get home to see my kids? That sounds like a great solution, but I don't have the headspace to think about it right now. Or, I know it's broken, but it's broken in a way that works for me. And so to redo it in the way that you want me to do it is going to require more effort than I have time to commit right now.
Yeah. And then the other part that you touched on, which is, I think, or at least it came through the lines of what you were communicating, is the people, and I'd say even sometimes ourselves, who are service seed are thinking of solutions for SMEs, have never been or do not have the SME experience. And so there's a mismatch in thinking, I understand how to offer a payments, an insurance, a financing solution, never lived the day-to-day. So you touched on that disconnect. And then the practicalities of doing business for the SME taking over in terms of how they can even respond to the best offer put together for them.
Yeah. I remember one of the things that came up in projects that we did together, we did a bunch of stuff on commercial payments. And we had to be careful about, you can reduce your staff count. Because a lot of small business owners don't want to think about that. They're not, they're proud of the jobs they're giving to the people. It's more than a company, it's a family, right? You would hear these types of things. And so you wouldn't say to anybody, well, this will allow you to, do, it allows you to do more with less, but you're not reducing. You are positioning it in a way where this allows you to increase efficiency. This allows you to use the resources that you have to do more the people that are back office that are doing, for lack of a better word, paper pushing at this point can be focused more on value added tasks as opposed to some of the manual tasks. The context of working with an SME is different. And obviously being a venture backed startup is different than running a small business, kind of a traditional small business. But, we experience those same types of things, right? Where, especially in this funding environment, trying to watch every penny. And so, we get approached by companies that have treasury solutions and, do I need a treasury solution? We're 7 people. How many bills do I have every month? How many people do I have to pay? How many things do I have to process? We're hitting the point where it is beginning to become a discussion of, do we begin to outsource some of these finance functions to somebody else? Is it worth the amount of money we're going to spend versus the time that I have? And on the other end, locking it in, right? So if I go and give somebody I have all my bills sent to somebody else's email, one, I have to spend the time to make sure that it's working right, which is at least a couple months of kind of double work. Right. And then I'm locked into that provider, which is not necessarily, if you're a small business, the most comfortable thing to be. Their eyes light up when we have the initial conversation because the tool looks really cool. And then, well, if I have to do this, or is it my top priority? Where am I spending my money? I'm putting out fires, right? If you're a small business owner, you're putting out fires all the time.
You're moving into return on investment, but you touch on something which I think is really interesting, which is the human aspect of almost like a bad habit that is a bad habit.
Yeah.
We're so used to it, or walking with a limp and you get used to it, that learning to walk a different way is hard. So what I'm understanding is you've been offering them something that should improve how they work.
Yeah.
But they're used to dealing even with a different or more serious problem, and breaking away from how to deal with that problem. It's a challenge to reset the rail.
Well, selling anything to an SME selling anything to anybody is, how do you get into their top 3 priorities, right? So if you're not in their top 3 priorities, then they don't have the headspace for it, right? And especially if you're dealing with an SME, again, they're putting out other fires, so they might not even be able to get to their top 3 priorities. And so what we see a lot of the times is we are a priority, and our challenge is, how do you move that? Because in any situation, when you're selling to, in this context, we're going to say SMEs, but I would say it's also true at larger companies, your biggest competitor is not your competitor. It's inertia. It's doing what you're still doing. Because if you're selling into somebody, if I'm selling into, the founder of a company, he's making a decision on, return and investment, and my margins are already tight. Do I want to try this? This is money out of my pocket, and I don't know what it's going to be. And I've got to deal with these 3 other things. Also, let's talk in 3 months after I deal with this. But in the meantime, something else is going to pop up. And so again, how do you keep that close and have that conversation? As you move into a mid-sized company where there starts to be a bureaucracy that you're navigating, then you're talking about people that have jobs. And so when you're selling in a solution, and I think this is relevant to the KoreFusion clients as well, that person choosing to use your solution over somebody else's can't just be a little bit better. It has to be better significantly enough that they're willing to take a risk in their career to go to bat for your solution. Because something is broken. Use an example, right? Let's say you're my boss and you say, hey, Isaac, our accounting solution is broken. Can you find a new one for us? The easiest thing for me to say is, Jan, I went and I looked, and you know what? None of them are that much better than the one we're on, so we might as well just stick with it. And there's no risk in that. We already know, again, the devil that we know. We're walking with a limp, but we know how to walk with that limp. I'm going to go and say, hey, it looks like FreshBooks is better than QuickBooks. Let's go switch. If that doesn't work out, you're going to maybe fire me, right? Like, am I willing to risk moving from QuickBooks, which has its problems, to FreshBooks, which has problems that I don't know, on the off chance that it might be better? Like, you need to give me, the rule, and again, cliches. The human nature of it is, why am I going to go out on a limb for something if I don't know if it's going to be better?
And you mentioned a return on investment, but how are you defining that in terms of, I guess return on investment could be monetary, but it sounds, when we're dealing with the independent professional, the gig worker, the micropreneur, do you really think they're thinking in terms of return on investment monetarily or solving a pain point? And when you take that return, be it either monetary or solving a pain point, what are the levers that you've learned you need to push on to go from being positioned as number 5 priority to one of the top 3 priorities so that your solution is considered?
Yeah, so now you're into to persona mapping and value propositions and all sorts of fun stuff that I'm, still very much a learner on. I think that there's different ways that you can do that, and some of it is the personal interaction. You have to understand what motivates the decision maker. And so, some of our clients are people that just care. Like, there's the ROI, and they want to make a return on investment, and we have a calculator, and we can say, okay, well, right now you're spending, your turnover is 15%, to find a new worker costs this, to train them costs this, the retention, is this, all these different, the formula that we're going to use to say, what is your expense every month based on the fact that you need to find new workers to fill that gap of people leaving? And if we can reduce it by X, then we've saved you money. Or on a productivity basis, if we can get somebody who's doing 10 jobs to do 12, or maybe they're doing 4-star work and we can get them to do 5-star work, and that's going to allow you to differentiate yourself and charge more, or there's less customer service work, or there's less rework because you don't have to go back and do it again if you're cleaning and it was a poorly done job. So there's ways to calculate it from a financial perspective, but there's also people that just care. And so I think initially you need to find somebody that believes in that and believes in that value that you're giving, and saying these, in our case, these are people that are working hard and deserve dignity and deserve to have basic protections if they are doing these types of work. And so, maybe I don't want to pay the full fare of, in Brazil, it's a CLT of a formal worker and all the benefits that come with that. But, this is a part-time worker that works occasionally for my platform, and I'd like to make them feel like they're valued and that they are, benefited not just monetarily from working on my platform. But it is about finding the people that care or helping them to care. And then on the other side, I think that beyond the kind of financial and retention piece, there's also solutions that you can do that are a little bit more kind of enterprise sales techniques that you kind of get somebody more excited. So you can think about it from your pricing perspective. Maybe you don't have an implementation fee, but you list an implementation fee so that you can get rid of it to make your client feel more excited about it. And so one of the things that we think about doing in the midterm as well is selling directly to the workers that are on the platform to be able to offer rebates back to the companies to subsidize the cost. But, there's other things that you can do more from an enterprise sale perspective that can drive some of this. And coming to payments, maybe it's being able to say to the company that you're offering maybe it's a purchasing card, and you're saying, hey, right now your employees are buying stuff on their cards and it's a lot of work and this and that and the other thing. And so this is going to save you time, but also, hey, if you use our purchasing card, you actually get 1% cash back in addition. And that's a new revenue line for that company that they weren't considering before.
Right.
So I think there's things like that.
We spoke a little bit about the human aspect of needing to find a value, to latch into a human value and a true value proposition. At the forum, I heard one bank, and it really shocked me. This was a large South African bank, actually.
Okay.
And the bank that they had come from prior said something shocking. We need to switch to caring about the customer. We need to, as if that was at some point lost, and you would never care about the customer. And contrasting it how other digital banks in the country and neobanks now here in Brazil are saying the first and foremost value that we have is the customer. And what you're saying is that human, non-financial element is we need to care about the SME. That needs to be a driving mantra, whatever the proposition is. We want to make the life easier and better for an SME, and not just push our product and say it's better, adopt it, I mean, that seems to be a central theme.
It isn't always clear who your client is. You may think, obviously, take insurance, as specifically in Brazil, which is an intermediated market. Who is the client of the insurance company? Is it the end user, or is it the broker who's selling the product? And I think that they go back and forth quite a bit on that debate of who do they need to be incentivizing to get their product out there. That's going to drive a lot how a product gets positioned, rolled out, who it gets presented to, and in what way. That may not always be the original thought of why that product is being pushed from the, that product owner's mind.
You've seen it now with insurance. You saw it before with KoreFusion, with payments a lot. We've dealt with global organizations, large banks, who have this problem of they are at least one, if not multiple steps removed from the customer, the human, at the end of the product and the value chain. To keep that person at the end of what is being delivered eventually in mind, do you think it has to be a monetary reminder in terms of aligning your KPIs as a manager to motivate that? Or do you think it's something that could be motivated in a different way?
Now you're into behavioral science and generational differences and what motivates somebody that's a millennial from Gen Z and Gen X. And
is it even different in what you saw in insurance versus payments? I mean, insurance is all caught up in being what it is by name, insurance, and supposedly there's a human element to it. Is it really more human than what we've seen in the payment side?
I think it depends on the different spaces, right? And a lot of these products, there's obviously a financial consideration, but there's also kind of an ease of decision question. And it comes a little bit back to the point we were discussing earlier about kind of inertia. And sometimes the easiest decision is to make no decision at all, unless somebody you have confidence in is trying to help you or push you in a direction, and you're going to trust that person. And so there's also that human element of sales, of finding ways, this sounds a little manipulative, but it's not meant to be, of, finding those trusted sources and leveraging them. Or, we were talking with our colleague Jay as well, who I guess also did one of these conversations. But, insurance is, you get into the embedded discussion of right product at the right time, presented in the right way, with the right offer.
From a trusted...
Yeah, exactly.
Or a trusted source.
Right. And it's all about, in a lot of ways, and that's embedded anything. That's not just insurance, but it's understanding the journey that person's on. So, from my perspective, I bought life insurance when my brother hit a deer. Well, could have died. And I got scared. The cliche is you buy insurance out of obligation or fear. He hit a deer. It was a crazy thing. I went out the next day and called up the insurance broker and said, hey, we need life insurance policies for myself and my wife. You're not thinking about that right now, but, when you go online to Expedia and buy your plane ticket, there's that insurance policy there, and they've done a good job of embedding that. And so where are the other opportunities to do those types of things? And thinking within the context of an SME, what are the solutions that you're providing to them as a payment network, as a bank, as a whatever, and how are you fitting into their process flows and solving, again, the financial, but also process, decisioning, mind space challenges that they're also dealing with.
I'm really curious in understanding, now that you've been working with SMEs, how they react, and if they react differently to the proposition of this solution makes me more money, or this solution saves me money.
That's a great question. I think that the first reaction, it depends on the SME and it depends on the person. So like any good economist, my answer is it depends, or maybe. But I can say that the first reaction is usually top line. So somebody wants to make more money. Somebody wants to know, how is this increasing my revenue? Cost savings are always a harder thing to convince somebody of because there's other factors that may influence it. So if I know I'm making more money and I know how much it's costing me to make that more money, that's an easier calculation than if I do this, it will reduce this other bill by this much, because they're going to be skeptical of that. And I think it's just human nature to think income versus savings. So it does depend, and there are different people that respond in different ways. But anytime you can make somebody more money, and it's, do this, get twice, that's an easier sell than do this and that goes down by half. It's just an extra logical leap. It's easy to talk about doing all these things, and it's harder to stay disciplined.
Yeah.
And so finding that right balance is really important.
I think we saw that a couple of years ago with crypto. There's probably a very strong argument it's going to stay here, but it was the shiny thing, and there was a lot of investment that way. Do you think we're getting excited, and particularly from an SME point of view? And we saw this in the forum. The forum is about exploring AI as a means to improve offerings and payments and financing for SMEs. Do you think maybe right now we're overhyped with AI, and in particular with SMEs?
I think that it makes logical sense for us to think about it. I think that an SME is probably not using AI and may have some fears about it. Mm-hmm. And where AI is being most successful from what I've seen is where it's hidden. And there's AI involved, but it's not necessarily AI first, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it makes the most sense for small businesses. And so I think AI is here. I think it's certainly going to continue to grow. I do think that there's a hype cycle, all those types of things, which is a different conversation entirely. We're looking at a lot of things we can do with it, but very much in terms of, internal to us or things that are going to help our client, but that the client may not realize is necessarily AI.
And this almost sounds like it goes back to the idea of an embedded payment and embedded financing, embedded insurance proposition. The AI is going to help facilitate prompting that at the right time.
Yeah. But that user doesn't necessarily know it's AI.
Right.
Right. Or maybe you are being able to, one of the things that we talked a lot about over the last few days was, customized tailored products, right? So something that's designed with that needs of that business in mind, right? That AI can help do that. AI can help with the customer support. It can help with the lead qualification. It can help with a lot of different things that are not necessarily going to be, flashing AI to the SME who maybe has some concerns about it or maybe doesn't understand it. It's easy to say, to a small merchant in a rural community that has that, credit book behind the counter where they're keeping track manually of the debt that, different people have. Wouldn't it be great if you did that in your phone, in an app, and this and that and the other? That person may not have great connectivity. Their battery may run out all the time. They're afraid it may get stolen. They like the process that they already have. Maybe they like working on cash and calculating it on paper because they don't have to declare it. There's all sorts. We saw that in that project we did. I'm forgetting what exactly it was, but there was something in Nigeria where we saw that some of the payments we didn't want to clean up because the roundups of the payments when businesses were collecting was part of the profit revenue margin, right? Yeah. And so it wasn't just the price, it was there were other factors involved, right? So sometimes there's other subtleties that you have to understand about why certain processes are certain ways. And so AI sounds great, but we're in Brazil, in the country of the jeitinho, which is, the system is broken, but it works for the people that it works for. Some people don't want the broken system to be fixed because it works for them. And so, maybe they don't want AI because it'll fix something that they don't want fixed. Mm-hmm. And we have to consider that, right? There's, the formal ways that things work are the official ways, and then there's the other ways. And we have to understand the interaction between those two.
So, this takes us back to the jeitinho, something that's broken. We may just want to continue limping and And breaking away from that limp is going to be hard.
Yeah, convincing somebody to do it, because there's pain on the other side, right? We've all had that accident where we've hurt our ankle or hurt our leg, and then those days when the ankle's finally better, you overcompensate, and now something's thrown off in your back, and it takes a few more days to fully recover.
Exactly. And as a closing question, taking all of this, what would be the advice you'd have for a payments, insurance, financial service company looking at SMEs, or at least the SMEs that you've been dealing with over the last few years? What should they keep in mind when approaching them and offering what these providers think is a legitimately better way of doing business or improving business?
Yeah, sure. So, obviously, take anything I say with a grain of salt. I am still figuring it out. I'm still learning. Advice is free. I think that's all very important to say. But I think it also comes back to some of the cliches that you hear when you start a startup and when you're doing these businesses. Go in listening first. I think that's the first thing that you have to do. Mm-hmm. Don't go in trying to pitch your product. Go in trying to understand the pain point and the problem, and see if your solution actually solves it, right? So You're going to be wasting your time if you're pitching the wrong solution to the wrong problem. It's also going to backfire. You're going to get bad reputation. You're going to get all those different things that you don't want. And so the first thing you should do is go in listening to the pain points, the problems, rather than trying to say, I have a hammer and you're a nail.
That's fun. Well, thanks, Isaac. It's great to
always
to pick your brains.
Always a pleasure.